How's it going, everyone? December 14th edition of the Fantasy Fanatics MMA podcast. I am James Lynch. He is JHK. If you haven't watched the show before, we preview an upcoming notable fight. And on this edition, we're going to be looking at the middleweight title rematch between Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker. The date on this has changed around a bit. The latest, from what we know, and we'll get into all the things that have sort of happened leading up to this fight, is now February 12th. UFC 271. So wanted to clarify that because I know the dates were sort of being moved around a little bit here. Before we get into everything, though, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. If you want to submit questions, we will answer them after we do the breakdown. They can be about anything, but we like to also stick it to the topic at hand. And also make sure you download the Fantasy Fanatics MMA app. I got my picks in already, so we got a lot to talk about. And also stay tuned towards the end of the show because we are going to give our underdog picks for the weekend. I actually did quite well on my underdog picks last week. We can maybe talk about that a little bit later. But let's get into this fight. I'm so glad. I mean, listen, I shouldn't say I'm so glad because I still feel like this fight might not happen. I don't know why. This fight should have happened like 3 fights ago. It should have happened a while ago. And for whatever reason, it didn't. And, I like one thing I'll just point out before we sort of dig into this is like, I can't remember a former champion having to fight not 1, not 2, but 3 contenders to get another title shot, especially with how dominant he was prior to that in Robert Whittaker. And I don't know what the deal is. Like, it seems like there's some beef on the end of Adesanya's camp or whatever. I'm not sure exactly why it took this long to book this fight. And I know that obviously Adesanya wanted to fight John Jones and move up to 205 and everything else. But I feel for Robert Whittaker here because he's a great fighter and he's long overdue for this opportunity. So as far as how we got here because for whatever reason, the UFC wanted to take forever to book this rematch. Whittaker's been ready for a while, in my opinion. I think, like I said, after that first loss he had to Adesanya and then he won the next fight, I think he could have put him right back in the driver's seat there, but maybe they wanted to delay it because of the fan bases. I'm not entirely sure. But first, let's get your thoughts, JHK, on just the fact that this fight's happening.
Is it happening or is it not? That's the question, right? Because when they announced it on the broadcast last weekend, I think Izzy put a blue cap or something. And for the kids, I guess that means that that's not the truth.
I guess so. Yeah, I'm still learning the lingo too. Yeah, I don't get all the emojis and stuff.
And then I went and looked at Israel's reaction video for 269. He was eating pizza, man. He was eating pizza in the video, which means that I don't know if he eats pizza on a regular basis during camp, but February 12th is pretty close, man. It's not like 7-8 weeks from now.
Yeah,
so,
I wouldn't look too much into that because every fight, some fighters do a cheat day during their camp, but you're right. Like, it is weird that, if this fight is actually happening, you're probably not eating pizza, but teach their own, right?
Yeah, you got to take this fight seriously. So, Robert Whittaker, like you said, he deserved this title shot a long time ago, and he's proved it over and over again. I just think the UFC doesn't really, I don't want to say they don't like him, but they don't really want to put him in a position to be the champion again so quick because I don't think he did a good job of promoting the UFC while he was champion. I don't think the UFC thought that way, of it. He was a great champion. He fought whoever they brought to the table and he performed crazy. He fought Yoel Romero twice, right? And he shouldn't have, but he did, and he dominated him. They were crazy fights, right? Very action-packed fights. So I think this fight is the fight to make. But like you said, it's hanging in the wind, man. Like, for some reason, those camps, dude, they just they're playing mind games with each other, but it's fun. I think it's fun too at the same time.
Also got to point out that this wouldn't be the first time we've done a preview and the fight didn't end up happening. So we wanted to get ahead of this thing. If it does happen, then at least you guys have our thoughts on it well in advance. And again, this fight's in February, but we like previewing all the big fights. So that's kind of why we're here doing it. Let me just try and share our screen right now and we'll take a look at everything that we got going here. So there we go. I mean, this has got to be one of the best rematches in UFC history. Like, in terms of 2 fighters in the prime of their careers going at it. You look at the betting odds right now. Adesanya favored here. In most cases, about a 2-1 favorite, which I get, and we'll dig into why that could be a little bit later here. But let's look at the tail of the tape. Adesanya 32, Whittaker 30. It's interesting that Adesanya is older. Like, don't you almost think that he's younger in some ways? I don't know why. Maybe just because of the way he behaves and stuff. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just saying that you think of Adesanya being younger, maybe because he was in the UFC later. I don't know.
Exactly. I think that's why we think that, because we just think if you've been in the UFC for a long time, you're just much older than everybody else that came in along later, which is not the case in this fight.
22 fights for Adesanya, 28 for Whittaker. And again, part of that is because Whittaker, more of an MMA guy. Adesanya had having a lot of kickboxing experience. So don't put too much stock into that. He's got 21 wins. Whittaker's got 23. That's interesting. So just think of how many, they have a couple little gap there in fights, and Whittaker's only got 2 more wins. Whittaker's got 5 losses. Now, keep in mind that some of those losses were at welterweight, which was a division that I think even Rob himself admitted was not a great weight class for him. Adesanya's got 1 loss. Jan Blachowicz, we saw it earlier this year. 15 knockouts for Adesanya, 9 for Whittaker. 5 wins by submission, 0 wins for Adesanya by submission, which not surprising there. 72% finish rate for Adesanya, 61% finish rate for Whittaker. And the height's going to be interesting, but again, we just mentioned it there. Adesanya just fought at 205. Whittaker used to fight at 170. Adesanya's 6'4", Whittaker's 5'11", 80-inch reach for Adesanya, 73.5-inch reach for Whittaker. So Whittaker's got to find a way to get on the inside, and I know that was an issue for him in the first fight. Let's start with Whittaker, the former champion. I want to give this guy some respect here. I like Whittaker. He's a good interview. He's a good fighter. Again, maybe not the most marketable guy in the world, but I still think he's like a blue-collar, fun fighter to watch. And you got to give respect to a guy who's beat Yoel Romero a few times. We see one of the wins there. But, he's done a really good job. So you look at the last fight, Kelvin Gastelum beating him by decision, which, I know Gastelum's fallen off a cliff a little bit, but still went out there and got it done. Jared Cannonier beat him. That's a really solid win. If you look at what Cannonier's done, outside of that fight, knocking out Jack Hermanson, now going to be fighting Derek Brunson. Darren Till, again, similar story. Darren Till, I know, fallen off a bit, but at the time, Darren Till, in fact, JHK, I remember people saying that Till was going to knock out Whittaker. I remember that. I remember people saying this is the fight that's going to happen. Didn't happen. Whittaker took his best shots and ended up winning it. Had a bad night at the office against Adesanya, which, there was a lot of things sort of going into that. He had the layoff. If you remember, he was supposed to fight Gastelum for the title, and then he had that hernia issue. So there were a lot of health things that went into that. And he even spoke about this sort of after the fact that, being champion, there's a lot of pressure to not only perform, but to keep active. And I think that was something that weighed on him a little bit. So look, even the greats have bad nights at the office. We just saw that last week with Amanda Nunes. It's going to happen every now and then he's got the wins over Romero. But I think we can put Robert Whittaker in the underrated category. I don't think this guy gets nearly enough respect for the resume that he's had since moving up to 85 and everything that he's done. But just really impressed with what Whittaker's done. My opinion, and this is just my lone opinion, I'll get your thoughts on this. I think he's the number 2 guy in the division. I think Whittaker beats pretty much everyone in the weight class except for possibly Adesanya. Not to reveal my pick here, but I think he's that good. I would put my money on Whittaker against 99% of the middleweights in the weight class, and that 1% being Adesanya. Your thoughts on Whittaker and what he brings to the table?
Whittaker, man, I look at him kind of like a Alex Volkanovski, man.
I was just thinking of him too. I was just thinking of Volkanovski too. Similar, great guy, not like an over, and don't mean to interrupt you there, but not like an exuberant personality, but just a great fighter that gets nearly not enough respect. Anyways, go ahead.
Exactly. Family man, someone that you could actually promote because they're not in the news doing stupid shit, right? They're a real solid fighter. And I think when it's said and done, Robert Whittaker is going to be one of the greatest middleweights of all time. This is my opinion, man. I think he'll get the title eventually again. I feel like he's going to be fighting for a while. I don't think he's going to retire anytime soon. He's 30 years old. You know what I mean? He has a long time in the sport still left. And I love his style, man. He's action-packed. He uses his striking really well, mixes in wrestling really well. And we've seen it in the last couple of fights, right? Where in the Till fight, he stood there and kind of banged with Till, right? And held his own and won the unanimous decision over him. And then Cannonier, that third round was pretty crazy, right? Where he knocked him down and actually broke his arm with that kick. And then Cannonier came back. And actually, Cannonier had a moment at the end of the fight. And then Robert Whittaker used his fight IQ, took him down, and rode out the round. I think that's something that we got to look at in his last couple of fights. He was using his brain a little bit more compared to the Adesanya fight, right? In the Adesanya fight, he went in there, he was emotional. He even talked about it, right? He was emotional. He let that take over. And what he did was he went, shot for shot with Adesanya, probably one of the best ever to step in there, striking wise. And that's not going to work out for you most of the time. So anyways, he comes back, like you said, 3 in a row against the top contenders, waxes all of them, right? And looks better and better every fight. That's one thing that you guys got to look at. He looks better and better every fight, mixing things in. And that kick, man, did you see that? Gastelum ate so many kicks to the head in that fight, 5 rounds too. And that's another thing. He went 5 rounds with Till and Gastelum in that run, which I think is going to be beneficial heading into this fight.
100%. And, I just one last thing I'll say on Whittaker is that, look, I think the Whittaker we saw against Adesanya in the first fight, if you're basing everything off that first fight, you're not doing your homework because, like John said, he's improved every fight. We've seen him in different situations. The wrestling as well could be a factor in this fight, right? I mean, there is a blueprint to beat Adesanya. Maybe it's a 205 blueprint, but still, if you look at Jan Blachowicz and what he did to Adesanya earlier this year, there is a way to beat this guy, right? So if you're Whittaker looking at that, maybe a different game plan. And again, I think we're going to see a much better Whittaker in this fight. And I think a lot of people are going to fixate on the first fight. That's a bad idea. It reminds me of when people fixated when Cain Velasquez got knocked out by Junior Dos Santos. And I remember hearing going into that fight, Velasquez had some injuries. He wasn't himself. And everyone was just thinking Junior's got his number. And Cain proved himself in that second fight. I'm not saying Whittaker's going to do that here, but, again, you can't just base everything off one fight. You have to look at the overall resume. That's what I was going to say. Okay, let's get to Adesanya here, the last style bender. Great career. It's pretty incredible what he's done, right? Coming over from kickboxing, made his UFC debut in, was it 2019, I think? I was trying to remember exactly when his debut was. I'll just quickly do a search
18.
here, but 2018. But still, the fact that it was 2018 and then he comes all the way in and he ends up winning the belt in 2019 is pretty remarkable. Like, I know he had the kickboxing background, but like, that just doesn't happen, like, at all. Like, there's very few fighters to come over and have that much success. So he's had an incredible career. I love Adesanya. He's actually one of the header photos. Well, he used to be one of the header photos on my YouTube channel. I like watching this guy fight. I like his personality. A lot of people don't like him because of that, because of the fact that he's outgoing. And look, he says some weird stuff sometimes. I'm not going to deny that, but he's good for the sport because he's getting eyeballs on the sport with his, his YouTube channel, his comments, his social media stuff. I think all of it's great, and you're going to get haters when that comes. But I feel like he's a guy that up until recently was also in the Whittaker spot where people are like, oh, this guy's just fighting nobody. He's fighting Anderson Silva, when it's like, no, he's actually really good. Like, the fight for me, I'll tell you, and we'll go, I mean, it's not listed here, but it was a little while ago. I got to see Adesanya fight Brad Tavares live. And I remember picking Brad Tavares going into that fight. I remember thinking like, okay, like, for me, I think that Tavares, with his veteran experience, with the wrestling, it's going to be an issue. And Adesanya went out there and took care of him. Now, I know Tavares was injured in that fight, apparently, after the fact. We learned that. But that was the fight for me that really opened my eyes that, okay, this guy's pretty well-rounded. Like, if you can survive a Brad Tavares, who at the time hadn't sort of hit that downfall at all, that was a really big win. So ever since then, I've been all aboard Adesanya with all of his fights, including Jan Blachowicz. I thought he was going to beat him. That didn't end up happening. But Adesanya, just an incredible resume. The one loss to Jan Blachowicz. Some people will look at Jan. Oh, well, Jan just lost to Glover. So him losing to Adesanya is even worse. No, you can have a bad, like, fighting is so difficult in the sense that you got to be on your A game every fight. And if you're not, like, I don't put too much stock into one loss. If you got a couple losses in a row and you're seeing a decline, that's a difference. But, he bounced back in a big way against Marvin Vettori. Marvin had a lot of momentum going into that fight. Marvin was a guy that, I think tried the trash talk, tried all different types of things. And Adesanya shut him down, despite what Marvin says. Marvin lost that fight. I don't care what Marvin says. He lost that fight. There's no doubt about that. I think also the Paulo Costa fight is one that really surprised people too. Because again, I remember hearing a lot of people saying Paulo Costa is going to knock out Adesanya. Didn't end up happening. Adesanya had his number. And dare I say, Costa's gotten a lot worse since that fight because Vettori took care of him in that one too. So he's really great. Overall, obviously, really good striking, versatile, fast. The ground game's a bit of a question, and the wrestling's a bit of a question. But you look at who he trains with, you look at his coach; they're covering all their bases for this fight. So that's why Adesanya is the favorite here, and I just think he's awesome for the sport. So your thoughts on Israel Adesanya and what he brings to the table against Whittaker in the rematch?
Israel Adesanya is a bona fide superstar. He's only doing good for the sport. He's spreading the sport worldwide. Yep. He has 5.5 million Instagram followers in that short period of time of him being the champion. You know how many followers John Jones has? 5.8. And he's been the champion since he was like 20 in his early 20s. He only has 5.8. It shows you how big of a star, how far of a reach that Adesanya has. And he performs too at the same time, man. He does what he says he's going to do. I picked against him in the Costa fight and I ate crow. But I picked against him again in the Jan. Jan went in there and did his thing, right? Because, Jan was just a bigger fighter. The game plan wasn't working for him. But then he returned against Marvin. And Marvin was on a streak at that time. And a lot of people thought, yeah, if Marvin can mix in his wrestling, he could have a chance against Israel. And he tried it. It didn't have a chance. It just ended up being worse than the first fight, right? And it was just, I loved what Israel does, man. I think one thing that shines above all is even above his wrestling or his striking is his mind. I think his mind is like razor sharp. I think his mentality is like no other. where he's on the biggest stage. And I kind of see that a little bit in on a lot of fighters, right? But I feel like he is just above all, you know what I mean? Like, and his physical and his mental match up perfectly. It's not like Conor. His mind is up here and his physically he's at another plane, right? It's not
Yeah.
like that. I think Israel is we're seeing the prime Israel. 32 years old. The best Israel we're gonna ever see is right now, and we're gonna get to see him fight against Robert Whittaker. Is he the best Robert Whittaker that's right now? We don't know yet, right? We're gonna see when they clash.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Okay, let's get to our pick here. So I think that let's get the tail of the tape up here so I can kind of set all this up here. So my thinking is this: I don't think you're going to see a quick finish like you saw in the first fight. I think you're going to see a much more patient Whittaker. I think you're going to see a much more patient Adesanya. I think if you're Israel and you're doing your homework, you're looking at what Whittaker's done over those last 3 fights. And again, like JHK just mentioned, it's a variety of things. It's the wrestling. It's not just the stand-up. It's the punishment he was able to take. I mean, if you think about it at middleweight, Israel's the only guy who's been able to knock out Whittaker. And not to say he can't do it again, but I think it speaks volumes to just how good he is. And you got guys like Cannonier and, fighters that do have serious knockout power that have been able to finish Whittaker. And I think that's something that Adesanya's got to be careful about, because if he does go for broke, and you've seen Whittaker go 5 rounds, that's got to worry you a bit in those later rounds. Although saying that, Adesanya had his sort of dig deep moment when he fought Gastelum, and he was able to persevere there too. But I think we all know now that Whittaker's a much better fighter than Calvin Gastelum here. What I think is going to happen is I think we're going to see an all-out war. We're going to see a fight of the year candidate. We're going to see a fight where both guys are going to show us things that we haven't seen before. I don't think you're going to see a stoppage in this fight. I think this is going the distance, and I think Israel Adesanya is just going to slightly take it a little bit more. I think in those later rounds, he's going to be a little bit faster. And I think Whittaker's going to land some good shots on Adesanya. He might even wobble him. Like, I could see that happening, honestly. I think Whittaker is that good, and people underestimate him that much that I think he could get a few shots in on Adesanya. But ultimately, I think what's going to happen is Adesanya is just going to be too fast for Whittaker. He's just a little bit ahead in that department. And I think what's going to happen is it's going to be one of those all-out war sparring sessions where we're going to gain so much respect for both guys. I could see it like a Poirier and Hooker fight, like where it's going to be close. But ultimately, I think, the one guy who's just a little bit better is going to persevere here. And I'll say this too. Looking at the odds right now, I'm going to probably lay a little bit of money here on Whittaker at plus 220. I think those odds are way off. I think it's a classic case, kind of like last weekend with Poirier, where I think that people put too much stock into how popular the fighter is, and they don't put enough stock into the resume of the opponent. And to me, it's crazy that Whittaker's such a big underdog. Like, I get that Adesanya beat him decisively, but we've seen evidence since then that Whittaker's not only gotten better, but he's beaten really good competition and done so in dominant fashion. Like, all of the fights that he's had, Whittaker's been pretty solid in those. Like, I don't think there's ever a question when it went to the scorecards of who won the fight. Like, maybe I know some people felt like Till might have edged it, but I don't know who those people are. Maybe UK fans or something. But I just think that Whittaker is going to give him the toughest test that he's had in the middleweight division and may have for time to come here. I mean, I know we have that Brunson and Cannonier fight coming up here, but I really believe that Whittaker's the number 2 guy in the division, and I think he's going to push Izzy to the brink. And I think it's going to be something similar to what we saw with Gastelum and Adesanya, where it's just going to be an all-out war with a fight where both guys are going to gain fans here. So I know it's nuts. I know these two guys are strikers and they have knockouts. But if you look at Adesanya and Whittaker, they do go the distance a lot, right? Like, Adesanya went the distance with Vettori in his last fight. Whittaker's gone the distance in all of his fights. Don't be surprised if this goes the distance. In fact, if you want to play it safe, I'd be willing to bet it's going to be close to plus money. Maybe the fight goes the distance. So maybe I'm out to lunch here, but I think Adesanya is just going to edge out a decision here, and it's not going to be a finish like last time. Your thoughts and your pick in this fight?
When you look at Adesanya's run in the UFC, the only fight where he was like in a war or rocked or anything, right, was the Gastelum fight. Every other fight, I don't think he's taken that much damage at all. Maybe in the Yoel Romero fight where he took that one big punch and his lip was all swollen. But other than that, really, he hasn't taken much damage. Even in the Blachowicz fight, he wasn't taking big shots. He was taken down, but it wasn't like Blachowicz was doing like crazy ground and pound on him, right? Where he's taking all this. Like, his brain is pretty solid, right? But when you look at Whittaker, in his last 3 fights since the Adesanya fight, he was knocked down by Till, right? I believe he was rocked by Cannonier, and Gastelum hit him with some good shots, man. So it shows you that Israel not taking so much damage compared to Whittaker taking some damage, getting rocked, getting dropped. I think that heading into this fight, Whittaker, skill versus skill, I think he's really up there. Like in like a overall, when you look at it, I think overall he's probably better skilled overall, like in all departments. but Israel is just good at going in there, implementing the game plan, going where he has the most advantages, and the reach, right? The speed, all of that, right? The just like the angles and everything is just so far advanced compared to Whittaker. And I feel like they're going to be in there. Whittaker's going to try to wrestle him, of course. I think that that's going to happen. But I feel like Whittaker will take him down, but I think Israel will get back up. The key, I feel like, for Whittaker is to get Israel into scrambles. You know what I mean? Like have him become vulnerable and like sometimes Whittaker will like get into these scrambles and he'll throw that head kick off the release. I think that's an important, aspect of this fight. I think if he could do that and maybe catch Israel, he has a better chance. But I think straight up striking, I don't think he's going to be able to beat him. I think what you said, he's going to go in there and he's going to do what he did to Marvin Vettori to Robert Whittaker. I'm taking Israel Adesanya. I don't want to pick against Israel ever again, unless he goes back up to 205, then I'll pick against him. But in the middleweight division, I think he's in his prime and is going to be pretty much untouchable heading into any fight against anybody. And so I'm picking Israel in this one.
Two more quick things I got to mention here. First thing is this fight's in Texas, which I know that's not what the UFC wanted, because obviously they'd love to do this in Australia or New Zealand or one of those places, but they're one of the biggest hit by COVID, or they're one of the most restrictive. So I think that's part of the reason it's not happening. Here's the other thing we got to put in reality here. Whittaker loses this. Where does he go from here? Like, I think people haven't really digested that either, because he'll be in the same spot as Colby and so many other fighters that have lost to the champ. Like, what do? He's not going to go back to 170. He's too small for 205. So he's kind of in this weird spot where, I guess he would just take fun fights or you give up and comers to him or whatever, but it's a really odd spot to be at just 30 years old, right? If he does lose this. So a lot's on the line here for Whittaker. Adesanya loses. They can always do the trilogy. He's so marketable. He could go up to 205, whatever. There's a lot of options for him. So that's another sort of factor to weigh in with this fight, is that, the implications of it. So just another thing to kind of keep in mind. I'm not saying it's going to have an impact, but it is one of those things to keep in mind when it comes to the fights. Okay, let's get to questions. Again, before we do that, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. You got to subscribe to get your questions answered. We will do our underdog picks here in the next maybe 25 minutes for this Saturday's UFC Vegas 45, the last card of the year, believe it or not. It's been a crazy year in the UFC, a lot of really good fights. Maybe I don't know. We'll have lots to talk, but I think we'll talk about this after, but I'm sure we'll do a show next week. I know the holidays are coming up, but we'll figure it out. Okay. Anyways, Antoine, good to hear from you. Yo guys, awesome breakdown like always. Do you think that, and by the way, he said this before he did the breakdown, so I got to give you credit for that. Do you guys think that Robert could be considered a top 5 middleweight of all time, 12-1 record, and he won the title? Absolutely. Not to mention, one thing we didn't talk about here, we kind of did, was that, Israel beat Yoel Romero in one of the just worst fights. I mean, it wasn't great. And I don't blame Adesanya for that. That was another thing where after the fight, people were like, Adesanya's boring. And I'm like, he's boring, really, because he had one of the fights of the year against Gastelum 2 fights ago. So I don't get that. It just shows you how fickle fans are. But you see Whittaker, he actually engaged with Yoel and he actually took some shot. Like, you got to give Whittaker credit for that. But it also leads to John's point about how much damage Whittaker's taken too. Like, Romero didn't knock him out, but he still took some shots in that one. So to answer your question, 100% Whittaker should be considered one of the best middleweights of all time. No questions asked. Yeah,
if you look at it, Whittaker, if he didn't exist, Yoel Romero would have been the middleweight champion, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's like that old Michael Jordan, when Michael Jordan was in the NBA, everybody was second place. And at that time, Yoel Romero was second place the whole time until Israel came along. But I think he's top 5. I think when it's all said and done, like I said earlier, he's going to win the title again. Even if he loses this fight, it's just like Colby. They'll float around, fight somebody, fight another contender, and wait until the belt changes hands, and they're right in there waiting for that fight, right there, looking for that next shot. So I think there's no problem with Robert losing this fight. Well, there's a problem always with losing fights, but if he does, I don't think it's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's get to our next question here. I have Israel, but I also think people are sleeping on Robert after the first fight. He was on a 2-year layoff coming off an injury, and no one gives him ring rust excuse, I feel like. Pretty much said exactly what we sort of said here. I think Whittaker, like I said, one of the most underrated fighters on the roster. I think the odds are off a bit. If I was to do the odds, I would do Israel as like -150 to -200 favorite. And again, I know Israel's done a really good job in that weight class, but at the same time, like, you got to look at what Whittaker's done too. Like, he's beat 3 really good guys in the weight class. So that's my thoughts on it. Okay, let's get to Sinister Story. What's up, buddy? Good to hear from you. One of my Patreons. He said, I brought this up in the Discord, but want to bring it to John. Some people still believe Charles Oliveira is on the juice because USADA doesn't go to Brazil directly. There's always going to be this talk. There's so many dumb narratives that have come out of this. Like Amanda Nunes was, the fight was rigged, like all types of nonsense like that I've heard since the fight took place. But yes, look, Charles Oliveira's not in the juice. He's a UFC champion. Like, especially in this day and age, like if you get caught, that ruins it. Like Dillashaw's lucky that he's even able to come back and perform at a high level, because it could have ruined his career. It almost has, right? So I don't think
you'd lose everything if you get caught. You can lose your sponsors. You lose everything. The belt. You get suspended for years. Why would you risk? I don't think. And if you look at Charles Oliveira's body, it doesn't really look much different than it was a couple years back, right? It's not like that Eric Silva situation.
No, or Vitor Belfort when he was on TRT. But I like, that's the thing that I just like, I laugh so much about is like the people who like dissect the photos, the weigh-in photos. It's like the Conor thing. Like Conor looks 190 in that photo. Like Conor's wearing a hat, and like the photo, he does look a little bit bigger, but like people act like he's like 200 pounds, but like he's got a crap ton of shadows on him. Like anyone knows anything about photography whatsoever. I took a photography class in college because we had to as part of my program, but like any sort of lighting can make a photo look completely different. So it's just hilarious to me. Like,
and he always puffs his chest out.
Yeah, unless you're like a body expert or something, or a doctor, like you shouldn't be commenting on like weight stuff. It's crazy.
More plates, more dates, right? You got to go check him out.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, I've heard of that guy. What's good, fellas? How's it going? Euro Bobby Knuckles by decision again. I think the fight's going to go the distance too, so I like your thinking there. My comments in these live chats got deleted for some reason, maybe too early. Oh, I don't know what's going on with that. We don't delete any comments unless there's trolls, but and you're obviously not a troll, my man. You've been in all my chats. If that happens, just repost the question. Sorry that took place. YouTube's weird about that sometimes. Even I've done like a poll question and pinned it to the top and it's disappeared. So there's been a lot of weird stuff. Appreciate all the work you guys have put into the podcast. My favorite all around, two of the best journalists and reporters in the game. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. Listen, I speak for JHK here. We love doing this. We're lucky to do this. We're very thankful to the All-Star and Fanatics for giving us a platform to do this, and for us to just have a show together, because we're good buddies. So it's we're thankful that there's an audience for us. So thank you, if anything. Tony Ferguson says he's got a fight booked. Any guesses? Yeah, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know who it could be. Because remember, weren't they trying to get him and Gregor Gillespie to fight, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah,
like
I think
a few
so.
months back.
That could be a possibility.
Like I just don't know. Like who's booked up? Maybe you know what? I'll throw a little curveball here that could be a possibility, just because he's a veteran and he's someone who doesn't have a fight booked. Rafael dos Anjos, do that rematch.
Yeah,
maybe that's a fight that. They fought, right? I believe Ferguson beat him. Did he not?
They did fight. Yes.
Okay, just double checking. I always get my lightweights mixed. I remember there was a while where I was getting Dan Hooker and Gaethje mixed up for some reason when it came to opponents. So just double checking that. But yeah, maybe it's that. But I just like Gillespie, I just don't see what the upside for Ferguson taking that fight is. I know he doesn't have a lot of leverage losing the way he has, but he's also been a mainstay in the UFC for a while. He's done them a lot of favors if you think of all the Habib, fallouts and things of that nature. I hope it's a veteran. I hope it's someone notable, like an RDA fight, or Conor or Nate. It's not Conor, obviously, because Conor's not ready to come back. Is it Nate Diaz? I'd love to see that fight, although Dana, sort of threw water on that a few months ago too. So I just hope it's someone like a notable veteran. Like I've said this before, I think if he was to rematch Cowboy Cerrone, I'd be totally fine with that at this stage in both of their careers. Because remember, the first fight ended with it was a doctor's cut or something, or it was a doctor's stoppage, if I'm not mistaken. The first fight. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. Do you have any theories on this?
No, I think it's either RDA or Hooker. I think those are the only options right now.
But even with Hooker going down to 45?
You never know. I don't think he's that committed to 45. I think if they give him a name like Tony Ferguson, why would you go to 45? You stay at 55, don't cut the weight, and you have a big fight, a main event, fight night most likely, something like that. I think he would take that.
Where does Robert go if he loses? I mean, he's pretty much fought everyone else in the division. They'll have to get creative and give him up and comers. Again, they've had to do this with, going all the way back to Uriah Faber or Rich Franklin, or, there's been a handful of fighters who've been that, that in that zone where you lose twice to the champs. So good question.
Well, he hasn't fought like Jack Hermanson. He hasn't fought Sean Strickland. He hasn't fought Uriah Hall. These guys are all
That's
in
true.
The top
Yeah,
10.
that's a good point. So, and Romero's not even in the UFC anymore, and he fought him twice, right? So
exactly.
There we go. Whittaker beat all of Adesanya's opponents for him. There you go. That's interesting. What's up? You guys see that Henry Cejudo reached out to Yuri to train for the fight. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's because the Schmo did a podcast. He does a podcast with Cejudo, and I think he said that Yuri reached out to him to train. I don't know the story there. I don't even know the connection, if there was one. again, when it comes to news like this, I'll believe it when I see it. I don't know what the reason for Yuri wanting to go and train over in the US would be when it seems like he's pretty happy training at home. So I have no insight into that whatsoever. So we'll see if it happens. But the last I checked, he was riding bikes, doing some bike training or something, because he always follow his stuff on Instagram. So I don't know what he's been up to. But
Henry Cejudo is trying to latch onto anything in the UFC right now. It seems like
it's just I'm kind of over it, like every time Volkanovski fights or there's some sort of featherweight fight, Cejudo automatically inserts him in there, and they're like, and I always get the question, how would Cejudo do against Volkanovski? It's like, we've been through this for the last 2 years. He's not coming back. Like I would put money that he's not coming back, because I've always said this in my head. Cejudo has a number of what he thinks he's worth, and the UFC knows how much he's worth in terms of viewership, and it's not as big as he thinks it is. Like, I don't think the casual fan cares that much about Henry Cejudo, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't think
even
he's reached that level.
Volkanovski said that in the interview when I talked to him. He said the exact same thing. It's like he thinks he's worth this much, and the UFC doesn't think he's worth that much. And it's not a big fight, I don't think. Is it a big fight, do you think, if he comes back? Do people really want Henry Cejudo to come back and fight for a title right away? I don't see like fandom like going that crazy for that.
Good morning, guys. Can you give some commentary on Brunson versus Cannonier? We'll probably preview that. We could even preview that next week if we want to. We'll one of the weeks we'll do that fight for sure. Giga Chikaze thought Marvin won. Yeah, I mean, that's loyalty to your teammate. That's what it comes down to. By the way, I got to point this out. I mentioned this in the Discord chat yesterday on Patreon. Miesha Tate gloating about how she picked Pena to win. Like,
that's your teammate, basically.
That's exactly it. Like, I'm just like, look, I'm not gonna. When I say this, I don't want to take anything away from Pena. Like, she went out there, did her thing. I gave my thoughts on this already. Like, I think, saying that all these other things about Amanda being off, like, you can't just say that. You got to give credit to Pena doing it. But like, SiriusXM, they've got her show with Miesha, and they're gloating about how, check out our show where Miesha called it. It's like, yeah, because it's her friend and teammate. If I went back and looked at all the fighters that picked their teammates that lost, we'd be here all day. Like, you can't do that. Like that, I thought that was so lame yesterday when they posted that. Like, check out Miesha Tate, who thought that Miesha knew that Juliana Pena was going to win. It's like, no. Like, if it's some random fighter, there was that Jill DeCourcy fighter at Invicta. She had some tweet from like back in March saying, I think Juliana's a bad style matchup. You get credit because there's no connection to you and Juliana, and that that makes more sense. But come on, we're going to take a teammate who picked them to win. Like, come on, that's like saying Michael Chiesa is an expert because he picked Juliana to win. They're best friends. Like, come on. Yeah. So that's I found that kind of annoying.
Well, if let's say Miesha Tate put 50 grand on that fight and she put Pena, then
great point.
Then it's something respectable. Like, oh shit, like you put 50K on that? Wow. What
did you think of the guy? There was a guy who bet $300,000 on Nunes. What a moron! It just goes to show you can't bet that much on a huge favorite. There's always a huge risk associated with it. So, JHK, your thoughts on UFC 269? I guess just give like a Cole's notes because I did a recap on Saturday.
I thought that the Pena fight, I thought that was the biggest upset in the history of the UFC. I just think so. I think it's above Sarah. It's above Holly Holm. I think it's way above Holly Holm, that fight. And Dustin, man, I expected Dustin to win that fight, man. It's just his jiu-jitsu is not as good as we thought it was, because he's been choked out in 2 title fights exactly the same way, against the cage, rear naked choke. Like, Charles Oliveira really, and what the crazy part is, Charles Oliveira played his game for the whole first round. And stood there and even got knocked down and came back, man. Charles Oliveira, all the respect to him. James been picking him for a long time, and now I think I can't pick against him.
Yeah, we actually had a couple good picks last week. I might as well just mention it here. Kai Kara France by knockout. I actually bet him by knockout at plus 255, so that was great. We had I had Oliveira, and there was another. Aaron Blanchfield. I had her too. What the heck? How was she the underdog? I don't know. Anyways, so that was really good as well. So there we go. You guys both know a lot of managers. Is Ali the only one who controls his clients' social medias, or do other managers do as well? There's one other manager who does that. I think it's pretty obvious who it is. Well, I'll just say it. Abe Kawa definitely runs Masvidal's Twitter. I think most people know that, right? Because Masvidal, like some of the stuff that Masvidal says, it's like, is that really him saying that? And you'll see too, like I think there's been times where like they both tweet something like around the same time. So yeah, that's the only one, which whatever. Like I don't have an issue with certain fighters having their social, like Conor should have Paradigm handle his social media because he just has a lot of dumb things that are going to get him in trouble. Sean Strickland should probably hand over his social media to Paradigm as well with some of the stuff that he says.
Not so good.
But yeah, like the Ali stuff. I mean, he got caught that one time, right? He's like, I think it was Edgar fighting someone, and he's like, I'm gonna finish him in the third, and it's like, yeah. So that didn't look so good.
Well, with the social media thing, I know a lot of fighters, not a lot, but there are fighters out there that have other people handling their social media, not necessarily their managers. They have someone else, and then they tell them, like, I think Poirier talked about it. Like, he doesn't handle his social media. He actually tells somebody like what to tweet, or they come to him about something, and then he says do this or do that. But the manager's just controlling it. To me, that's always been an odd thing. I just never understood. Like, why would you want another human being saying things for you? That's just like puppet shit right there. Like, it's like a puppet.
Like Islam going after RDA. I'm pretty sure that's Ali. Like, come on, Islam. You've seen Islam. The guy's super shy. Like, he's just like a kind of socially awkward guy. Like, I know there's a language barrier there too, but like, you really think he's going to go out of his way to say that RDA, whatever, you're scared? No, that's his manager. And I've given more than enough, time to that guy as far as talking about him on different podcasts, because I don't think he's a good dude. Okay, Adesanya for sure. Okay, what's next for Rob Font? Sandhagen maybe. A lot of options at bantamweight. There's Merab, there's Corey Sandhagen, there's Dominic Cruz who just won. There's there's a lot of options there. So I don't think you can go wrong in that weight class. Do you guys think that Pena Nunes 2 will be a main event because of the story and it'll be champion versus champion? Also, who would you have in that fight? I don't know. I mean, I posted the odds yesterday from Bodog that had Nunes is -400. I don't know about that. Like, I don't know. It's tough to say because Nunes, like, we've never seen Nunes look like that, at least not recently, right? And I do wonder, like, to a certain degree, if the COVID thing did play a role, because she got so tired in that second round that we haven't really seen her like that before. Now, granted, she was getting teed off too. So I'll pick Pena just because, I don't know, like, it's fresh in my head of how Nunes just fought. Would it main event? Possibly. It would have to be one of their, like, they'd have to have like a strong co-main event, I think, if they were to headline the card, because it's Nunes alone. I mean, we've known this in the past. They don't really like her headlining cards. And yeah, they could
do it like it could be the main event, but they could do it like how they did the Blachowicz fight, Glover, where it's like free on ESPN, but it's a pay-per-view card. They could do it like that. If in the fight, I'll take Nunes in the second fight. I think the COVID had something to do with her gassing so fast. You know what I mean? I think this is my theory on that, because I don't know. It just, like, she hit a brick wall. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's weird. It was just very odd how everything played out in that second round. And you know what was weird? As I was on like a Spaces with J Spec Driver, our guy J Spec Driver. Shout out to him. Yeah. And I was just playing around with him. He's like, make a pick. I was like, Juliana Pena, second round.
Oh, really?
And and like, I was just joking around. It wasn't a serious pick, but you know, it happened. I was shocked too. But yeah, I'm taking Nunes in the second fight.
I don't think it's the biggest upset of all time, by the way. It's up there. It's at least top 5 for me. I think Sarah GSP was a bigger upset, only because Sarah was on a show with a bunch of, like, you know, kind of washed up fighters. If you remember, the whole show was called The Comeback, and he gets a title shot, which probably wouldn't have happened. Now, granted, Pena's title shot was a bit weird too, because she had lost 2 fights prior to GDR, but at least Pena won the Ultimate Fighter, like a show that actually had like really good up and comers on the show. And that
was 8 years ago, though.
True. But if you look at her losses, they were against really good fighters. Like, she at GDR, Valentina, right? So there's that side of it too. Whereas Sarah, like, if you look at some of his losses prior to that, like, he lost to some guy. I'd have to go back and look, but I still think Sarah GSP was
Shoni Carter.
Shoni Carter, exactly. You know what I mean? Shoni Carter, wasn't that a spinning back fist?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that's a bigger upset, but to each their own. I mean, they're up there for sure. Do you guys know what the fighter pay was for UFC 269? You'll have to double check that. I'm not a pay guy. Who would you have if Charles lured Khabib back out in 2022? I'll probably still take Khabib, but that's just to leave the fans away from me, because they'd say, you're hating him. No, I don't hate him. I think he might have. I think there might be a way that Charles could win. I don't know. Anyways, to be fair, TJ was on EPO for one fight. USADA went back a year, so no EPO. Well, no, I'm just saying in general that, like, when he did get caught, it was a 2-year suspension in the prime of his career. That's what I was getting at. We're not going to go over the semantics of it. It almost seems like the UFC was trying to make Francis mad by rushing him to fight and make an undefeated guy the champ, basically saying, hey, we got the next guy if you don't want to fight. Well, the UFC has had his battles with Ngannou anyways. Why did they do an interim title fight with Lewis when they didn't need to? When Ngannou had won the title in March. there's obviously something there with Ngannou and the UFC, and I think his contract, and then his manager coming out and saying all this stuff. So there's something there. I don't know. There's a lot of weird stuff going on behind the scenes with the UFC.
Do you remember like way back when Ngannou lost the first fight against Stipe?
Yeah.
And then Dana White came out and said, like, this guy is just terrible to deal with. You remember that? Do you remember Dana White coming out? And this was before all of this stuff happened, before he was the champion, right? So I'm feeling like that all just continued when he became champion. And Francis, you know, he has some power because he's the champion, right? So he wants to do things his way. And the UFC, you know, the UFC, they don't want to do it his way. They want to do it their way. And I think that's why they're clashing heads. I don't like the theories about, you know, the UFC doing this and doing that. Yeah. Because it's the UFC. What do you think?
Yeah,
those theories are, you know, probably some truth to them.
If Dustin stays at 155 and doesn't fight Conor next, what do you guys think of him fighting Islam, Beneil, Loser, or Chandler? I don't think he'll fight unless Islam loses, maybe they do that. I don't think he fights Beneil. I just don't think, like, you're Poirier, right? Like, you've put in the time, you've fought the who's who. You're not going to go fight a Beneil Dariush. Nothing against Beneil, but I mean, of all the names in the top 5, he's probably the least, like, sort of notable, like in terms of, you know, fandom and all that stuff.
I think Chandler seems like he's
I was gonna say Chandler seems like it makes sense. Yeah, I'd be down for that.
He's angling for it, it seems like, too.
Don't be surprised though if Poirier wants to fight Nate Diaz though too, because I mean, they had some past beef. They were supposed to fight on the New York card years ago. It depends. I sort of talked about this on my recap show. Like, Poirier's got a couple options. Does he want to try and make one more run at the title, or does he want to just, you know, take a couple more fights and ride off in the sunset? Because if he goes the latter, then you want like your Diaz fights, like your fun fights, like even a Tony Ferguson fight or something. You know what I mean? Like, those are, well, he's not fighting Ferguson because if Ferguson has a fight announcement, they're not calling Poirier after the title loss. It's like, hey, you want to fight Ferguson? Probably not, right? So, yeah, I think he
has 3 fights. I think he has 3 fights left in him. I think he has the Colby fight, he has the Diaz fight, and he has the Conor fight. Those are the 3 fights that are going to be the biggest fights for him that make him money. I don't think he goes for another run at the belt. I feel like, you know, it's just too long now. You know what I mean? There's too many killers in the division.
Let's keep it going here with the questions a little bit faster. If Nunes doesn't get the rematch, she will. Who is grabbing the first shot at Pena? Aldana, Vieira. Yeah, Valentina. Or, you know, I'll throw another one out to you that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. What about Holly Holm? She's a pretty big name in the weight class. She was a former champion that holds some weight, and that's a fresh matchup. That's a huge fight if they decide to book it. So don't rule her out either. If the UFC books Tony Ferguson versus Gregor Gillespie, I'm going to throw up. I just look like you can't do Tony like that, because I don't think Tony would win that fight personally. Gregor's very good. He's a good grappler. He could just sort of out wrestle Tony for the amount of time. Tony's had problem with wrestlers dating back to when he fought Danny Castillo. So I don't think it would go any better with Gregor, who's very, very good. So yeah, I wouldn't throw up. I don't get nauseous when the UFC books fights. I know it was an analogy there, but I wouldn't be a fan of that. That would be dumb. Tony Ferguson has no fight left in him. I think he's got a bit. I think there's guys he could still beat in that weight class. Conor returns against Nate Diaz and gets a win. Does the UFC give him a title fight? Of course they do. Look, he fought Donald Cerrone at 170, and then they gave him a title shot. Like, how does that make sense, right? It was a title shot. No, hold on. Was it a title shot? No. What? I'm losing my mind here. McGregor fought Cowboy, and then he fought Poirier.
Khabib, right?
No, he fought Cerrone. No, he lost to Khabib, then fought Cerrone, and then he fought Poirier. No, it was just a regular lightweight fight.
Okay.
Because they wanted to just, because I was
well, it doesn't matter. Conor, if he comes back and let's say Oliveira's the champion, I see them giving him a title shot against Oliveira. Why? Yeah. Why would they not do that? You know what I mean? You don't know how many fights Conor has left. You might as well juice the orange as much as you can.
Well, I don't think they're going to give Conor, like, honest to God, I don't think they give Conor this title fight. I know he's sort of angling for that right now as his next fight, and I know it's a fresh matchup, and I know he's Conor, but 2 losses and you get a title shot, that's a really tough sell. I know to casual fans, they don't care. Conor could lose 8 in a row, and there's be fans being like, yeah, but you got injured and it was a fluke the first, you know what I mean? You already know fans are going to say that, but to anyone who pays any, like, you know, even 40% of attention to the sport, there's no reason why Conor should get that title shot. That's crazy. So
I can't wait until he releases that documentary that he's talking about the whole camp leading up to the second, or the third Poirier fight. I want to see what exactly happened in that, if it's true what he's saying. You know what I mean? I'm waiting for that.
Triple C is so cringe, can't watch. I'm with you right there. How do you see a potential Poirier Chandler? I think Chandler KOs him in 2. Okay, but hold on. I don't know if he KOs him. Poirier's got a pretty good chin. Look, in the past, I know people, that was sort of a narrative because Michael Johnson knocked him out, and he's been knocked out. I think he was knocked out at featherweight as well. But I mean, he's a pretty tough guy to put away. If it's three, well, it depends if it's 3 or 5 rounds, but I don't think Poirier's getting knocked out. He's got a pretty good chin at this point. I think he's shown that time and time again. He took some shots from Conor and he was fine. I know Chandler hits hard too, but Poirier's a much more, I think he's improved his defense tremendously since, I'd say, the Michael Johnson fight. I don't think Chandler knocks him out. I think if he fought Chandler 3 or 5 rounds, I think it's potentially going the distance, honestly. Or maybe
I can see it playing out like that Gaethje fight.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gaethje, it's gonna be crazy like that, and we would love to see it.
Cejudo is one of my favorite fighters, but he's irrelevant. I agree. Hey, J Spec did make it. Good to hear from you, buddy. Why is Kevin Lee going to EFC? Yeah, I did a video on this yesterday. I'm surprised by that. They must be paying him really well, but think about it. You're Kevin Lee. You've been talking all the smack about Khabib throughout your entire career, and now you're basically his employee. Like, doesn't that seem weird?
Yeah, it is weird. But
also, I mentioned this in Discord, but I'll bring this up here as well. Notice the amount of fighters from Dominance in that promotion. And I know Khabib obviously has ties, and I know Rizvan, who's one of the partners of Ali at Dominance, is, I believe, the president, or he's associated high up there. But keep an eye on the matchmaking there. This kind of reminds me a bit of early World Series of Fighting days, where you could see some of the matchmaking favored some of those Dominance guys. Keep an eye on that, because Ray Borg's there. There's Tyrone Spong and Rashad are actually all managed by Dominance as well. So keep an eye on that. There's some weird stuff going on there. So keep an eye on the matchups. And yeah, if you're Kevin Lee, like, I don't know, man. Even if the money's good, what if they give you some Dagestani, guy that's no one's ever heard of, and you lose to him? I mean, that's career suicide right there. I think that's a bad move for him personally.
Bigfoot Silva, I think he was pulled from the main event.
It's Haratonov now, I think, is getting the shot.
Yeah, that's a good fight. I'd watch it.
Way better fight. Bigfoot Silva should never be sanctioned by anyone ever again. You're literally looking at someone who's going to have severe health issues. So JHK and I were hanging out and freaking out about Julia Buster Pena. Yeah, I did the hangout stream. You can see my reaction. I was nuts there. I don't know if she wasn't her friend. I promise she'd never pick her. That's probably true with Misha Tate. I definitely feel what you guys said about Henry, 3-weight champion, possibly crazy. I feel like 1-to-1 milestone. There we go. Waiting for a Chimaev fight announcement. I think we all are. I don't know what the UFC is going to do with him. I think they're trying to get him to fight Leon Edwards again, which is like, come on, really? Like, we're really doing this still? We're trying to make this a thing? It's crazy. So what happens to Cody? I don't know, man. I think they give him one more fight against a grappler, and then it's probably like, okay, you make up your mind, because Cody with that chin, he's never going to be a contender again. I'm quite confident in saying that. And I think Cody's an exciting fighter. He's interesting, but that just, I think, proved once again that this guy is not durable enough to be a champion at this point. I think Garbrandt that fought Cruz. No, I know, to be a champion again is what I meant. So
no, but the thing is, like, because he was a champion, there's so many matchups for him. What I mean?
They'll give him some rope for sure, but I think if he keeps getting finished like this, it's not going to be much longer.
I think he goes back up to 135, and they face him off against Sean O'Malley. They're going to give Sean O'Malley,
and Sean O'Malley will knock him out if they do that.
Yes, if that's what they want.
Yeah, I mean, that, you know what, that does kind of fit the mold, because some people are like, oh, O'Malley's going to fight Yanez now. He's never fighting Yanez unless it's for a title. There's just zero upside for O'Malley taking that fight. I've always said this. Yanez is a god among hardcore fans. People love him. He's active on Twitter. That doesn't mean shit outside our bubble. A guy like Garbrandt, people know who he is, right? He's a former champion. He's got some clout. Exactly. They had their thing at the presser. I think that was all by design. So to me, there's 2 fights for O'Malley that I think make sense. One is Garbrandt, which you just brought up. The other one is Dominic Cruz, because I do think O'Malley could beat Cruz at this point, because Pedro Munoz nearly finished Cruz in that fight on Saturday. That's the one thing, you talk about how great Cruz's performance was. Munoz almost finished him there. And I know Munoz had a knockout win over Garbrandt, but he's not typically a first-round finisher type guy traditionally in his career. So I think if you're O'Malley looking at that going, I could probably finish this guy. So yeah, I know people think I'm crazy for saying that, but I think O'Malley's got some serious power. So that's my thoughts. Who would you guys take in a Kara France and Kopp matchup? Ooh, did they train together? No, Kopp was at AKA Thailand, because France was at Tiger Muay Thai, I think, a little bit, was he not?
But they probably crossed paths over there somewhere somehow. But that would be a great fight. But I don't think Kopp is up there yet to be able to fight, Kara France. Kara France is angling for a title fight.
Yeah, no, I know, but he also lost to Royval a couple fights ago. And Kopp, if you look at who he lost to, I think he beat what's his name, the Nicolau, and then he lost to Pantoja, who might get the next title fight of the winner of the thing. So I don't know.
Kopp is 14 right now in the rankings. So
true. Yeah, that's a good point too. Who would I pick? I think Kopp's got a little bit more power. Do you think, or no? I don't know.
Yeah, he does. He does have more power. I think he's faster too.
I think I would pick Cop in that one. But Francis is a dog though, man. Like that would be a 50-50 fight. That would be like
he's
a
hitting his
-110
stride
apiece.
now. If you really look at what he's done so far, I think he's very dangerous right now. It's like perfect time. If they want another city kickboxing champion, this is the perfect time for them to slide him in and give him a chance to win the title. I think that's what they're gonna do, to be honest with you.
Let's go to a few more. Actually, you know what? Let's do our underdog picks right now. We got about 10 minutes left. We want to make sure we got time for that. Let me get the odds up here on the screen and we'll go through it. Okay, we're not going to talk about ACA. We're not going to talk about CFFC. We're not going to talk about Titans doing a card, man. I never hear about them. That's crazy. Okay, my underdog pick of the week, and if you've watched my preview show on Monday, you already know who it is, but I am going with Macy Chasson at +160 against Raquel Pennington. Now, look, Raquel Pennington, if you look at her resume, she's only lost to the best, at least recently, right? She's had, I think, if you look at her last couple fights, you know, Nunes is in there, GDR, or not GDR, but she's had a couple of opponents that if you look at who she's lost to, pretty good. However, Raquel's also taken a lot of damage. Remember the Nunes fight? That was, you know, a lot there. She's you know, taken a lot in the last couple matchups. And I think with Macy's very strong for the weight class. Remember, she fought at 45 on the Ultimate Fighter. I know she doesn't have the experience that a Raquel Pennington doesn't have, but getting her at plus money, I think she's one of the most underrated bantamweights in the division. She had one bad night against Lena Landsberg. Outside of that, Macy's been pretty good. And I think her fight with Aspen, had they fought, would have been pretty close, because I do think Macy's very underrated as well. I think this is going the distance, but I think Macy's going to pull this one off against Raquel Pennington. And if you can get her at +160, I think there's some good value there for Macy Chasson. So that's going to be my underdog pick of the week. JHK, who you going with?
Man, that's a good underdog pick, because there's not, it's very slim
there's not
pickings
many
for this event. You know what I mean? But if I'm going to take an underdog, which I look at it, I think I would probably take Derek Lewis, man, at +120.
Yeah.
Why not, man? There's always the chance of the knockout. I think this fight ends in a knockout. I don't think this fight goes past the third round. Someone's getting knocked out. It's either Chris Daukaus or Derek Lewis. If I was going to bet money, I'd probably just throw some on Derek Lewis, since he is the underdog. Another one, I probably put maybe Angela Hill, you know what I mean, at +290 against Lemos. I know Lemos has been a destroyer lately, but I think Angela Hill is like one of those tricky fighters. Maybe she'll bounce around and kind of eke out rounds. You know what I mean? She's known to do that, right? She's known to like eke out rounds, but not win the fight via split decision. We've seen that many times, but maybe this time the MMA gods will gift her in a decision. Who knows? But I think that would be not too bad. It's crazy that Carlos Diego Ferreira is an underdog too, man.
The amount of there's so many Gamrot fans out there, man. Like, yeah, I even suggested it was going to be a close fight. People were like, "Oh, Gamrot's going to be a future champion." It's like, okay, can you just be Jeremy Stevens? Let's slow the brakes on that a little bit. That was one I was looking at too, is Diego Ferreira, because again, I don't think I mean, he didn't look good in his last fight. I don't know what the issue was there, but he's still, I mean, we're a couple fights removed from him finishing Anthony Pettis. Like, that's a good win. I know Pettis isn't the same Pettis of old, but to finish him in that weight class was very good.
And he had a close fight with Beneil Dariush, who's fighting
exactly, split decision. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you another one that I'm just curious to see how he shows up, is a Sun Sao at +220. He's fallen off a cliff. I mean, let's get real here, but his losses are against guys that I think would beat Ricky Simone, to be honest. I know Simone's a long guy. He's going to have the height and reach. He's also younger than a Sun Sao. Sun Sao's pushing 40 now. If a Sun Sao can even get close to the form that saw him when he fought, you know, I don't know, like Rob Font or something, for example, I think there's a chance there, and I think the odds might be a little bit off here. Like, Simone's been good. He hasn't been great though. Like, he's beating guys he's supposed to beat, but there hasn't been any sort of outstanding performances. And we've seen him have performances where he should have looked better, like the Uriah Faber fight. Like, how do you lose to Uriah Faber in the first round after he had been off for so long? That was
by knockout too.
I know
Uriah Faber knocks out nobody, right? So it was an odd fight. I think I kind of agree with you with that. I think a Sun Sao could probably go in there and knock him out. I think we'll see something surprising in that fight, most likely.
And one more I'll just throw it to you. Darren Elkins at +170. I know Elkins, you know, has been on a bit of a skid. Cub Swanson, you know, hasn't fought since he lost to Giga Chikadze, who's amazing. But if Cub can't put Darren Elkins away, which I think is going to be the case, because Darren's just durable as hell. They call him the damage for a reason. It could end up being a close fight, close decision. And that's where I think Elkins could maybe do a little bit more, but we'll see. Yeah. I know Swanson's -200. I think on paper, Swanson's a better fighter. I just look at the heart factor with Elkins as a guy that you can never count out. We've learned our lesson with that many times if you've ever bet him before. Okay, let's get a few more questions here. Those are our underdog picks. I think the fact that Pena wasn't scared and actually stood her ground shocked Nunes because she's used to girls just bowing to her. So I've heard this narrative before. I don't necessarily agree with it. People brought up, so I was talking to someone yesterday, or actually my news show that I do with Tajik. He's like, every fighter was scared to fight Nunes. Megan Anderson, yeah, sure, fair enough. Was Valentina? No. Was Chris Cyborg? No. Was like I think there's a lot of examples. I think being confident is part of winning your fights. Obviously, like you can't go in there thinking that you're going to lose, but I think it played a factor. But I don't think that was the main factor in her winning. I just think that she had the self-belief. I think she felt that she was catching Nunes at a good time. Remember, Nunes hadn't fought at 135 since December of 2019, so that is a long time to not cut that extra weight and perform in there.
And COVID.
And COVID. So there's a lot of other factors that we have to look in there as well. So, yeah.
When people use the word scared, I don't think the fighters are ever scared. I think the doubt starts creeping in, and that's what it was. I think that's what we saw on Megan Anderson's face. You remember that notorious video of her just looking ghost white? I don't think she was scared. I think it was just doubt. You know what I mean? You hear that she's a destroyer, she's the greatest of all time so many times that doubt could creep into your mind, like, oh my God, am I stepping into something that I'm not, gonna be able to come out of as the winner? That doubt is there. But I don't think any other fighter that she's faced doubted themselves, like maybe a Megan Anderson. I don't know. I'm not in Megan Anderson's head.
And Megan's not a great example because, I mean, look, I'll say this, and I mean, her and I have already had issues in the past before. I mean, she doesn't, I actually think I have her muted on social media now, but she does not take criticism well from anyone. And look, there's a lot of crappy fans out there. Like even I get flack for stuff where people are just making up ridiculous things, but like she's someone that takes a little bit too much to heart, any sort of like critiques or comments a little bit. So I don't think she's a great example of that, to be honest. Okay, let's get to our next one here. Nunes was established as the GOAT. GSP at the time, GSP wasn't considered that at the time of Sever, but GSP was in the prime of his career at that time. Now I know he had the loss to Matt Hughes. That was more of a mental thing. He talked about that after the fact about fighting his idol, and it kind of got to him or whatever. But when the run he went on after losing to Matt Hughes was incredible, including guys that were like in the like very, very solid opposition leading up to that title fight with that title defense with Matt Serra, including finishing Matt Hughes. Because I don't think Hughes had been finished at that point in the UFC prior to GSP doing that, at least not as dominantly as GSP did. Because I remember that fight. That was an interim, or that was a big win for GSP at the time. But it's more about Serra. Like I think Serra was a worse opponent for GSP than Pena was against Nunes. And again, I know sort of leading up to this, I talked about how, Pena hadn't had really any notable wins, but now that you look back on it, you also look at her losses were against really good fighters like Valentina. So that's where I think Serra was a bigger upset. But again, we could debate this all day. It's all good. Pena Nunes 2, Sterling Yan 2 on the same card there. Yeah, that's exactly what I would be thinking of, because that's something where two title fights that aren't exactly the type of title fights that like appease to casual fans, right? I would think. Yeah,
it is, but I don't think Sterling and Yan are going to fight each other.
You don't think so?
I just don't see that. I think Jan's going to fight somebody. I think he's going to defend the interim title for some reason. I don't know. I just don't think that they're going to fight each other for some reason. It's just.
I hope not, man. We got to see that rematch.
Yeah.
Can Dom Cruz get the belt one more time? No. I'm just going to stop you there. No. Just again, like I think people forget he got rocked in the first round against Pedro. And I know it's just getting rocked, but at his age, with his injuries and his layoff, he looked great against Pedro Munoz. But I personally think, and this is, and I've been a huge Pedro Munoz fan forever. I've been on this bandwagon for a while. I thought he beat Edgar. I think we saw a regression in Pedro over the weekend. And I don't think he's the same bantamweight that beat Cody Garbrandt or had a close fight with Edgar. I think that Munoz, I think we're seeing signs of aging with him. And I think that Cruz took advantage of that and just had a good game plan and went out there. But the fact that Cruz was almost finished by Pedro Munoz, there are guys who hit way harder at the top than Pedro Munoz does. And I think that's where Cruz won't be a champion again. I'd be willing to put money on that. And I think it's great what Cruz has done considering the circumstances of his career, but I don't think he'll ever be champion again. Not with this, how deep this division is.
Yeah, the path is really, really long to get to that title. And, I think Jose Aldo has a way better chance of being the champion compared to Dominic Cruz in that division.
Have you seen Marco Martin's interview with Lucas Grandsire? I saw little bits and pieces, but it's like a 30-minute thing, and nothing against Lucas. Yeah. I just, I got 2 kids. It's tough to watch everything. Do you see Chito Vera breaking through to be top 5, maybe title contender? Not yet. He got the win over Edgar. That was great. But I mean, I think Edgar was actually, if I'm not mistaken, I feel like Edgar was ahead in that fight. And then Chito kind of just knocked him out after the fact. I'm not there yet with Chito. He's got to prove a little bit more to me personally.
But he's calling out everybody, which is good. Keeps him out.
Yeah,
there.
you got to do that. You got to keep yourself relevant. I heard that Cowboy is in a training camp, so it might be Cowboy and Ferguson. Well, hopefully the UFC listen to me. Hopefully they're watching my stuff. Well, they watched some of my stuff because I was in the countdown again. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes.
And so they have to, you know, when that happens, I think I've told people this, they email me and they say, hey, can we use the footage? I was like, of course. I was like, just put my name on the screen or something. So it's all good. They wanted to give Conor the Khabib rematch after he beat Cowboy, if I'm remembering correctly. It probably was the case, and then Ali's probably like, absolutely not. So, which, yeah, I don't blame them. If I'm like, he shouldn't get a rematch after beating a guy like Cowboy. Come on. Thank God Bigfoot pulled out of the fight at Eagle FC. By the way, Joey, our buddy here, who does a great job on his YouTube channel, did a great video on Khabib and some of the stuff he's been saying in the media about, you know, disrespecting Aldo and then booking this fight attempting to book this fight with Bigfoot and Spong, which again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about dominance fighters. Spong's rep by dominance. Bigfoot Silva has no affiliation with them. They're trying to get their guy over. That's what that matchmaking looked like to me. And just keep an eye out for that. If a dominance fighter's on this card and he's having a matchup, look at who they're fighting and see if it's a favorable matchup for that fighter. Because again, look, Ed Suarez, let's call it like it is. He owns LFA. He definitely still manages some Brazilian fighters. There's definitely some favorable matchmaking in LFA. I'm not afraid to say that. But that happened in World Series of Fighting when Ali was involved as the matchmaker and a manager. Huge conflict of interest. I think you're going to see some of that happen here with Eagle FC. Just keep an eye on it, everyone. Like, that's something to monitor closely, because you can't have someone be a manager and also, you know, matchmake fights. And I know Ali's not the matchmaker or anything, but Rizvan's the president. There's some weird stuff going on there. Let's get real here.
He's not the only
involved.
one doing that. He's not the only one double dipping. You know, I mean, there's a lot of them across the board. You know, we could name a bunch of them. There's a lot of people in the media double dipping too. You know what I mean? I'm just saying the truth. It's, you know, like, we could call it out.
I know, but we got to
just
call it out. I mean, I'm not, look, I'm not saying they're the only ones doing it. I just mentioned LFA, but still there. By the way, speaking of LFA, I don't know if you guys caught it. Jamie Lynn Horth, we both interviewed her. Huge win, and had an injury going into that fight. Keep an eye out for her in the UFC's roster next year. And Tony Laramie, same deal, had an injury going in. TJ Laramie's brother, flyweight fighter, outstanding performance, and he was the underdog. He found an undefeated guy, got the win as well. So shout out to both of them, two Canadians making their mark. People say there's no talent in Canada. There's two examples this past Friday on that LFA card. So just got to give them a shout out as well. We're at the top of the hour. Let's just quickly zoom through these questions. We'll get out of here. Should Dawkins take a fight with Blades if he beats Lewis? Yes. Thoughts on Cowboy Cerrone and Maribek Taisimov? Taisimov, I don't think, is with the UFC anymore, is he? Did they re-sign him?
I heard that I think
he's with Ali now too.
I heard that he has his visa to go to the US. So if he has his visa, maybe he's gonna re-sign with the UFC. We haven't heard anything yet, right? So we'll see. Keep an eye on that. How would you see Moreno versus Pantoja rematch going? Moreno would beat him this time. Moreno's been a lot better than when he fought him the first time. Gregor, Gillespie, Beneil Dariush. Well, we'll have to see. Again, styles make fights. You never know. It's like Dustin Poirier fights Hooker to a close decision, and then, you know, Hooker loses some. Like, it just, styles make fights. That's all I can say. So glad I got to catch the show. Thank you, one of our biggest fans, and love the hat, John. What is next for Neil and Ponzi? I talked to Neil yesterday, by the way. That'll be up on MMA News later today. He's got one fight left in his deal, so maybe the next thing for him is figuring out that contract. But I think he, you know, he's talking about like some of the higher ranked guys. I don't know if we'll get that, but I'll tell you a fun fight, and I don't know if it makes a lot of sense ranking wise for him, but Daniel Rodriguez and him would be a great fight. I'd be down for that. Yeah, but Daniel Rodriguez is not ranked. I think. No, like, I know. I'm just. But it would be a great fight. Yeah, it's like a great fight. But I think he should fight Chiesa. Yeah, actually, yeah, Chiesa was another one I was thinking of someone who's you know, kind of fallen on tough times. Yeah, so there we go. In terms of losing his last fight. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. Really appreciate it. We will be back here next week, I'm pretty sure. And then we'll figure it out after that for the rest of the holidays. But you know me, I love working. Which sort of stumbling here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you download the Fantasy Fanatics MMA app. I got my picks in. You guys can put your picks in too. We can go head to head for the last UFC card of the weekend. JHK, anything you got coming up this week as far as interviews or anything you want to plug before you get out of here? I got an interview coming out this week with a bunch of fighters on the UFC Vegas 45, Dawkins, Parisian, Ferreira, a bunch of them. Go to the All-Star. So all the guys I interviewed too. So yeah, it's all the same guys, right? And also I have an interview coming out with Sergio Pettis, who just got that. Oh, awesome! Yeah, I did see that in the back end. Good for you, man. So check that out. It's some good stuff from the young Pettis. Couple quick things on my end. If you missed it yesterday, I had an interview with Chris Cyborg reacting to Amanda Nunes' loss. Really good stuff there from Chris, who, you know, talked a bit of smack, which I don't mind. She said Amanda quit. So make sure you check that out on Fanatics View. But all my interviews are on my UFC playlist on my YouTube channel.
Also did a UFC 269 breakdown, did a UFC Vegas 45 preview. I got another pretty good name coming up here interview-wise, and Roman, I think I told you who it was, and I have to interview them at 3 a.m. my time. It just shows you the dedication I'm willing to put in here, because it was the only time they could do it, and I was like, all right, we'll do it. So yeah, still booking a few more interviews this week. This is kind of my last week of doing as many interviews as I can, because I know fighters are going to want to take time off. I'm on the road as of next Wednesday, so visiting my in-laws, so I'll still be doing interviews, but maybe not as much work as I'm used to. We will be back here a week today, previewing another upcoming notable fight, so make sure you tune in. Enjoy the fights this weekend, everyone. Really appreciate you tuning in. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. We'll see you in a bit here, and next week, I should say, and have a good day.